T3B, we're going to look at graphing cosine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to draw sine of x and cosine of x on the same graph. So sine of x we've done before, so just the parent function y equals sine x. Alright, and you should know this by now, the x and y values that we're going to use: 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Alright, and for sine, it goes 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0. Okay, so that's nothing new. I'm going to go ahead and draw that graph. And then I'm going to graph y equals cosine x. So the parent function for cosine, I'm going to use these same x values. Alright, so we plug in these x values. Cosine of 0. If you look on your unit circle, the cosine of 0 is 1. Alright, if I plug in pi over 2, the cosine of pi over 2 is 0. If I plug in pi, cosine of pi is 1. If I plug in 3 pi over 2, cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0. And if I plug in 2 pi, pi is negative 1. If I plug in 2 pi, cosine of 2 pi is 1. Okay, so just like with sine, cosine also has a pattern. Alright, so I graph 0, 1, pi over 2, 0, pi, negative 1, 3 pi over 2, 0, and 2 pi, 1. So here is a cosine graph. Okay, and if you'll notice, it looks a lot like a sine graph just shifted over. That is because all of the x and y values on the unit circle are the same, right? They're just switched. Okay, and so a cosine graph has all of the same values as a sine graph, but it's using the x's instead of the y's. So that means that the process and the things that we're going to do to graph cosine are going to be almost exactly the same as graphing sine. The only thing that's different is the parent function y values. So when I go to graph cosine, I'm going to use the same steps that I did for sine. I'm going to find the first key point, and it's going to be bx minus c equals 0, and then solve for x. So just like we did with sine, alright, because it uses the same key points as sine, the same x values. Then I'm going to find the period. Alright, if we look at that cosine graph, from top to bottom back to the top, it also has a period of 2 pi. So we're going to find the period the same way we did for sine, 2 pi over b. Okay, find the interval. The interval is still going to be the period divided by 4, and we're going to add that to the first key point until we have a total of 5. So far from the first 3 steps, it is exactly the same as when we graphed sine. Alright, and then the last is find the y values using the pattern, and here's the part that's just a little bit different. For cosine, our pattern was 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. Okay, so same numbers as sine, they just go in a different order. We're starting at 1 instead of starting at 0 for the y values. So the first 3 steps, exactly the same. Alright, only thing that's going to be different is the parent function y values. So let's do one as an example. Y equals negative 2 times cosine of x. So my first key point would be bx minus c equals 0. Well, in this case, the only thing that's there is x. So x equals 0 is my first key point. So I'm going to make my table. Alright, my first key point is 0. Period is 2 pi over b. b in this case is 1 because there's nothing here. Alright, so my period is just 2 pi. The interval is the period divided by 4, which simplifies to pi over 2. So to get my next key point, 0 plus pi over 2 would be pi over 2. Plus pi over 2 again is pi. Plus pi over 2 again, 3 pi over 2. Plus pi over 2 again, 2 pi. So there are my x values. Y values. Okay, here's the parent function. I'm going to write the parent function in black. Okay, so the parent function for cosine, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, positive 1. Okay, in this equation that we're graphing, we do have a number for a. We have negative 2. So this means that all of my parent function values are going to be multiplied by negative 2. So I'm going to take the original y values and multiply them by negative 2. And that's how I'm going to get the y values for this graph. So negative 2, 0, positive 2, 0, -2. And that's what I'm going to graph. Okay, so it should look something like that. And then we need to go through and fill out our key characteristics. Okay, so amplitude. Remember, that's the height of the wave, and we said it was this number out in front, but it's always the absolute value. So we can't have a negative amplitude. I can't have a negative height. All right, so my amplitude here is going to be 2. The period we already found is 2 pi. Range, remember we're going from the bottom to the top, so this is exactly like sine. So the lowest point on this graph is -2. Alright, so that has to be less than y, and then y has to be less than +2 because that's the top of the graph. Okay, phase shift for this one is none, alright, or 0. My first key point is 0. This is exactly like sine. Okay. Vertical shift, exactly like sine, if there's anything added or subtracted to the end. All right, in this case there is not, so there is no vertical shift. Just like sine, cosine does not have asymptotes, so that is irrelevant. Okay, and then key points I would again copy. I'm not going to do all of them for the sake of time, but I would copy the values from my table. Okay, and you would do all 5 of them there. Okay, so here is one more example. Okay, I want you to pause here, try this on your own, and then when you come back, I'll have all of this filled out and you can check and see if you did it correctly. Alright, so that's what you should have there. Check all of that over. If it doesn't make sense to you, make sure you put a star by the parts that are confusing so that I can help you out when we get to class. And that is it for graphing cosine.